My name's Collin Donnel. That's a picture of me shaving. I've been making iOS apps since basically like the day that became a job. Probably some other people here started that same job on that same day, I bet also. And I have a blog, and I make an app for this website called Pinboard, if you like bookmarking things, called Pinbook, that some people like. And I have Twitter. I also have a startup, we're called Braid. We have a mail app that we submitted to the App Store. It's pretty cool. You should follow me on Twitter, and you'll see when it comes out. It does some things. So anyway, how many people are using storyboards in their apps right now? How many people like using storyboards in their apps right now? Right, so like 60%. That's pretty cool. So the first time I did this talk, I had just like kind of, I think maybe I just sort of learned more stuff and gotten a little more comfortable with storyboards. And so, you know, and now I think maybe I've taken that next step to now where I'm starting to like, I'm taking the next step after that where it's sort of like, maybe I won't do storyboards the next time. But I've used them completely in Braid, which is a pretty big app actually, and we use storyboards a lot, and I've learned a lot about it. And I've learned a few tricks to make them, you know, easier to deal with. I think well, let me start at my slide anyway. Storyboards are, most of the people here are using, I'm sure you all know what storyboards are. Storyboards are a, you know, it's a way to graphically lay out your app. You can create transitions, or what they call segues, right, between the different screens in your app. You can have multiple storyboards or one big storyboard for your whole app. You know, and it's a way to, you know, and there's some cool tricks about it. You can do things like lay out tables, views, visually, stuff like that, right? So, things that suck about storyboards. I am not really a giant fan of the way the whole, the segue thing works, where you set up your segue in your storyboard, and then it calls back this method with a identifier, which is a string, and then you have to use that to figure out what you need to do to set up the view controller it's about to show. And you have to, you know, make a lot more stuff public so that it can be set in that way. And you know, I think that's just sort of, it's a really, it seems, it didn't take me very long using storyboards to come up with some pretty, to realize that like that makes you write some really weirdly circuitous kind of roundabout code if you know, just use storyboards the way that, you know, they're designed to be used, which is, you know, setting it all up in there and doing our segues and everything. You know, I found that it made me write a lot of weirdly, you know, circuitous code, and also that I really don't like having what I'd call like magic strings in my code as much as possible. You know, and you can create a static variable or whatever, and it, you know, alleviates that. But still, I'm not really crazy about the idea that like if I type something wrong in my storyboard, you know, file, that like my segue is just not going to do the right thing, and maybe that will not show up until after we. You know, maybe that will not show up for some specific screen in the app until after we ship it or something like that. Although that'd be pretty crazy. Also, if anybody has any questions while I'm going, feel free just to let me know. So storyboards, the way they refer to the way in storyboard terminology we refer to each screen in your app is as a scene, right? So each screen would be a different scene. And you can do cool things there, like, you know, the things that don't suck about storyboards is you can do cool things like if you have a static table view, you can set it up visually inside of your storyboard, which is pretty nice. I haven't really, I personally haven't really found a way to do that that doesn't involve just writing a ton of boilerplate code, you know, like an enum and some crap, and it's just really, it's definitely the nicest way to do that. You set up like a static table view where you're just displaying a menu of something that's never going to change. And that's, you know, so, you know, you have these things called scenes. That's each screen in your application. The next thing would be that you have transitions, which are, you know, these segues that you have between each screen in your application, right? So you have, you know, so if you have your master view controller, then you would go ahead and control drag out to create a transition between your first view controller and your second view controller, right? All right, so I'm going to dump into Xcode and show you what I'm talking about. I was expecting to have I wasn't expecting to have a microphone I'd have to hold. So I'm a little bit unprepared for that. I apologize. Oh, is there? That's way better. I don't know if you could tell, but I was starting to get nervous because a lot of my talk involves looking at Xcode. And I was really starting to wonder how I was going to do that while also talking into a microphone. I'll just start a new project. Okay. So anyway, so I'm doing the normal thing, go into Xcode, start a new project. You know, I'm going to put it up on the screen in just a moment, because I think we all know how to start a new project. So, so I'm going to go ahead and find my little, oh, that's funny. That used to be an option. So I'm going to go ahead and create my little storyboard app here. My little storyboard app. It's going to go ahead and, you know, create it in my folder that I use. One thing that I thought was, I think, kind of interesting is that at some point in the past, I seem to remember using storyboards as being an option for all of these different things, and now it seems like it's just the default, which I think is kind of funny. So anyway, all right, there's my screen. All right, so I've got my, everybody can see that okay? So I've got my, you know, my regular stuff over here, and if I go into my storyboard, it'll open up. And I've got my, those look a little funny, don't they? You know, and I've got my regular guy here. So each of these would be what we'd call, so we have our, this would be like our, you know, our main view controller here, and then it has the segue here, which we can inspect, which is going to take us to our alternate segue. So what I did is I went and created a, like the regular like utility app. So you open the app, you tap the button, it flips over, and you see the other screen. So the terminology here that we need to know is that each of these would be referred to as, that each of these guys on either side, oh, sorry. Click this guy. That each of these guys on either side here would be referred to as a scene, and then this transition here would be what our segue between our two. And you can see the way they hooked up the transition was there's a button down here, which you can barely see because this is black. But there's a little eye here, and what you do to connect these between the two, you just drag, and then you can select the kind of transition that you want. So when they did it, they selected a modal transition, and they gave the identifier name of show alternate. So that's where that string I was talking about would go, right? I think most of us have seen this if you've done storyboards at all. The other interesting thing here is just that you can move this around. So this would be the, this is the initial view controller. So I've done before where, like, if I have a storyboard which is like a, for like my, a screen that I want to set up with a navigation controller in the storyboard, but actually I'm going to provide my own navigation controller when I instantiate a storyboard. When I instantiate a storyboard in code, I'm just going to grab the view controller out of here and use it, but I want to set it up with all the navigation controller stuff. You can change what the initial view controller would be. So like if this was sitting inside of navigation, you can change what the initial view controller would be, and then that will, when you go to load your storyboard, that will change what's going to happen. Does that all make sense? Okay. All right, so as far as transitions, we have a few options. We can do a modal transition, a push transition, we do a modal transition, a push transition, the flip horizontal or whatever transition. Or you're on iOS 7, I think we can also do custom transitions. You can set that up, you know, to transition between your different scenes and your storyboard. So all you have to do is go in, drag from one place to another, connect it, set the identifier, and set what transition you would like. Does that make sense to everyone? Cool. Okay, so segue preparation. So this is the part that actually kind of drives me crazy about storyboards as a concept is the way this works, and I will actually just go back and show you because it's easier just to show you. So the way that this works is when one of these segues is going to be triggered, what you're going to get called is this one method. I'll show you what it is. I'll make this font a little bigger so you can see it. Okay. All right. So what's gonna happen here is we're gonna get called back this method. It's called prepare for segue sender. And what you're going to do is you can talk to the segue object and you can ask it, what's your identifier? And you can see here what they're doing in the example code is they actually have this method. They're actually calling is equal to string and then comparing the string right there, which I don't know. That makes me a little bit uncomfortable for some reason. I don't know if that's stupid that makes me uncomfortable, but it makes me feel bad. And then the preparation they need to do is they're setting that the current view controller will become the delegate of the view controller, which is going to be displayed. So in their case, they have a done button in the regular utility app. They have a done button, and when that done button gets tapped, it's going to call back, and it has this method to dismiss the view controller. Does that make sense? So this is the place where any setup that you would need to do, you would just do right here. So you end up actually, you probably want to break this up in something a little bit smarter than just having, like let's say you had like 5 or 6 different things could come off of here, and they each had a bunch of different setup. You probably might want to do something slightly smarter than just have a big, if this, that kind of a thing. So I actually published a class which is I called a segue preparation controller, which lets you just say like execute this block whenever we have, when this gets called. So you can set it up, however you want. You can pass the blocks around, use them in different, contexts or whatever, instead of just having to, because this method can very quickly get very long, right? If you just put it all right there. So I'll show you that class in a little bit, and you can use it if you like it. I use it in my app, and it works okay. Okay, so one thing that's kind of cool and possibly useful, although I haven't quite gotten used to it with using Storyboards yet, is how many people are familiar with the unwind segue that they add in iOS 6? Right, so like not that many people. So it's kind of cool. They have a so what it used to be is that you would always have to have this setup where if you're displaying a view controller and it's going to do anything, you're going to set up a delegate for, you're going to create a delegate protocol and then have to set that delegate and then call that back, right? So you're always going to have to do something in that segue, prepare for segue method. Does that make sense what I'm saying? So anytime that, you're going to be returning data. And what the unwind segue does that's kind of cool is it lets you basically say like, call this method back with this view controller, inside of the storyboard. So it's a little weird. It's kind of less formal than like if you were to set up a delegate or something. I don't use it a ton in my app just because, I don't know, I just don't. But I think it could be useful for some people. So I can show you how that works. So what they did here in their app is they created this flip side, view controller did finish delegate guy, right? So we could create another one here, which would, so we could create another method, which would be blah, blah, flip side finish or something like that. And you need to make sure that's of UI storyboard segue is the type that gets sent. And then what that would let you do is something like this. If we go back to our main storyboard, you can see we have our done button up here. So the cool trick that you can do is, if you drag from here, from your done button down to you have this little exit guy down here. You might be able to see what it says. It says exit right there. So you can drag down to there, and then that's going to present your options. So right there you can see, you probably can't see because it's pretty small and I, for some reason, turned off Zoom on my screen. But it comes up with all the options that you have. So we set up a method which is an IB action and takes a UI storyboard segue for the sender. And then that lets us, in this case, that might make a lot more sense than having to say, set up a delegate just to say that I click the done button in this app, I tap the done button. So in this app we could, so in this app, instead of what would have happened before, actually both will probably get called now, but what would happen before would be, so if we go over to our flip side, so when the done button gets tapped now, this method here. So if we wanted to do anything, we could say like sender, I have to look up what the method is, but we can ask for the view controller there, and then we could, so if we had any properties, like if say that was our, login screen or something, we could say, like username text field text and password text field text, something like that, and then make this, root view controller be responsible for making the API calls that we would want to do. Does that make sense? Cool. So that might be useful too if you like things like that. Okay, so the next thing you can do that's pretty cool is one of the features you can only do if you use a storyboard is it allows you to set up your table views visually. So there's two ways to do that. You can either have a table view which is a static table view, which you create and it's just static content and never changes, right? Or what you can do is you can set up your table view cells visually and then have them be, you can set up your table view cells visually and then use those as prototype cells. So this is kind of like if you, the other way to do this is you could go, if you create a nib for a table view cell, you can assign that nib for a identifier for a table view cell. The same thing. Have anybody done that? Not really? Okay, that's somewhat surprising. So I think they added in iOS 6, you can, if you don't do your table view cells in code, but you use a nib, like a .xib nib, not a storyboard, they added in, I think in iOS 6, where you can say like, register nib for table view cell identifier or something like that, whatever that is. And then that will, instead of making you go and, create a bunch of, so it lets you, lay out your table view cells in a, in a nib. And you can do the same thing in a storyboard, except that you don't need to register the cell in that case. So, so the way that works is we call those prototype cells in a storyboard. And what that lets you do is say, so like in my app, I have like bookmark cells or something for my bookmarking app. And what that would let me do is, just, they're always going to have different content, but I could set up what each one, I could set each one up and then change it. Does that make sense? Are there any questions up until this point about anything? Okay. So I'll skip over. So the next thing that you need to do when you're using, when you're writing your app and you're using storyboards is at some point you're going to have to send information back. And the two ways that, we can do that in all the regular ways, right? So we can either set up a delegate protocol or we can use like the unwind segue. I kind of prefer setting up a delegate when I need it because it feels, I don't know, it's easier to see the connections for me that way. But sometimes when I'm doing something that mostly just amounts to I need to dismiss this at this certain, I need this to dismiss at a certain time, using the unwind segue works really well for that, right? So that just means dragging down from that green little arrow from one of the controls in your application. And let me show you how to do that. And then I'll show you this class that I want to show you. So if we go back, I will go back to my main storyboard. Oh, that's weird. I think Xcode autocomplete literally could not be any worse. All right, so I'm going to delete this flip side guy. I'm going to go here. I'm going to ask for a And I'm going to grab a new table view controller. We can see how this works. So if I did here, I could say, I could set up the same, the same modal transition or whatever that I had before. Funny enough, I won't be able to get back to it from here because I don't have a button to click here, but that's actually not that important. So if I zoom in our table view, if I want to set up, so if I want to start setting up, so if I want to set up a static table view, what I could do is this. I could say, I could click the table view, go to its properties, and I just go here, and I say use static cells. And that'll let me just start, going through, dropping subviews on, doing whatever I like. So in this case, I could set the type of one of these to be, set the type of one of these cells to be this kind, and I don't actually have to write any code to do that. I can just do my transition, and that'll just be static, and that works great, right? All right, and then if I wanted to use, so let's say I wanted to, you can do that as much as you want. If you need to create extra sections, you can go to this, in the inspector over here, there's a sections area. You just go ahead and click to add extra sections, and then you get extra sections. So whatever you need to do, you can change the style from plain to grouped. So this might be useful for something like a settings screen, something like that. It's really nice for stuff like that. Okay, so let's say I want to do dynamic prototypes. So what this will let me do is I can set up each one of these cells, give it a different identifier. So here I could call this like hello there hello there identifier. That's a funny name. This one I could give it a different type of cell. And this one I could give, a different kind of cell, right? And the difference here, well, one is we actually have to go ahead and create a table view controller class. So we go ahead and create our table view controller, and then the difference when you use dynamic prototypes is that you still have to actually implement some of the delegate methods, delegate data source methods that you would when you're doing table views the old-fashioned way, right? When you're doing them in code, because when you're doing a dynamic prototype, obviously, these are really just saying like these are all the kinds of cells that I would like to have in my in my table view, but it really doesn't help you as far as saying like when those when those cells should be displayed. So you still have to say like how many rows you have and what cell you would like to display. That kind of a thing. So if you go back to your table view controller, we'd still need to say, we'd still need to do all of these things. And the way that this works is different, is now we say, so what I called that hello there cell, hello there identifier. So what this will do is, the regular thing, we got our table view cell for row at index path method. Everybody's real familiar with this kind of stuff, right? Like I'm not like assuming too much. Okay. So we get our, we get that, and we just call the table view, we say DQ reusable cell with identifier, we give it the identifier we want, and then it's going to display the cell for the identifier that we asked for. Maybe. Make sure I ask for the right number of cells here. Number of rows, number of whatever. I probably typed the identifier wrong or something. Oh, or make sure that's all right. Okay, so, and make sure that I also typed in my identifier right. Oh, I didn't set my class. For writing a bunch of code in front of people, that's actually pretty good. So I'll set my table view controller class down here. So I'll say that's, I think it's funny that my my initial spell at COD as in cash on delivery for contracting. I don't know, I thought it was funny. Except it's not cash on delivery, it's cash before. So it's actually the opposite. That's what they would want. I had a guy email me the other night who told me, he's like, I need you to drop whatever you're doing and work for me through the weekend. And I'm like, okay. And he's like, and I have $1,500. And I'm like, and I don't know you. And I emailed him back, and he did not respond. He didn't. I don't think he liked my response. He may not have thought. He may not have gotten my He may not have gotten my unique sense of humor. Or that I can do math, and that he's an asshole. Okay. So, actually, when you talk about contracting before, my trick with contracting now has been, if I do any contracting, it's just to say, I learned this from my friend Nathan, who told me that when somebody comes to him and asks him for an hour rate for contracting, he starts at like $3.50 an hour, because he feels like that's going to like weed out a lot of people. And even if they talk him down to like $200 an hour, that's pretty awesome. Like, that's still pretty cool. So that's what I've started doing now. And I think it hasn't actually worked yet. Nathan might have a little bit more force of personality than I do to like pull that off. He's a lot bigger than me. Maybe they're afraid he'll beat them up. Nobody's afraid I'm going to beat them up. Although maybe they should be. You know, it's always the people who look like me who secretly know Krav Maga. So anyway, so that's why I started doing those. I just start saying like, Ben Simmons had this post where he was talking about, he used to test performance things where he'd try and come up with like a normal extreme to test, and now he tries to come up with an extreme. So instead of being like, somebody might have 100 tabs open in their browser, he'll be like, somebody might have 10,000 tabs open in their browser, right? So I started trying to come up with an extreme. I used to come up with my normal extreme for rates, and now I come up with my extreme. Okay, so I have this app that I was writing, that I was showing you guys. It's pretty sweet. I'm gonna submit it. Okay, so check it out. So we got our self-erode index path method got called back. And you can see that we have successfully loaded a cell. We know that because there's, you know, some numbers and shit. Sorry. I get comfortable when I start talking like I talk. So I apologize. So there's some numbers and things, you know, we can tell that it's we can tell that there's a cell there. And then, you know, we can go forward with our breakpoint. We've got 4 of these things. And now look, we've got dynamic prototypes for our table view. And that's how easy that is. Isn't that cool? The other method that I like a lot, that apparently like 2 other people had heard of, so I'll show you because it's pretty sweet, is, you know, maybe we do it up in our, delete all this junk. So if we had like our view did load, if we had, let's say, we could say register. You guys really know, so now that you see these, are more people familiar with these? So you have register class, register nib. So if we went and created a nib for our, so if we went and did like the same thing for the prototype cells, you can't recreate the static thing without using storyboards, but you can do prototype cells sort of without using storyboards, which is that you can go and create it and then use this register nib, and then you give it a UI nib, and then give it the identifier that you'd like to use, right? So that's a pretty cool method if you're not using storyboards for something. Another cool thing about storyboards actually is that you don't have to use them for your whole app. You can use them for parts of your app. So in my Pinboard app, I use them for like just like the settings screen, because using the static table view is great for the settings screen. You know, and where storyboards really fall down is where I have a lot of where storyboards really fall down is where maybe I would have several different ways to get to the same scene, because you end up dragging out those segues, and the arrows get all crazy and they start overlapping each other, and it just becomes a mess. That's probably a good sign that maybe storyboards weren't the best choice right now, when you have like 4 of those segue things going to the same screen, and they're all overlapping each other and you can't tell what's happening anymore. That's probably a good sign that maybe you should consider a different approach here. So where they work really well is when you have something like a settings screen, where you have basically like a static set of content that's never going to change, and each row is either going to have like a switch in it maybe, or maybe it's going to just take you to one other scene, something like that. They work great for stuff like that. So it's very easy to see, you know, what you're doing, and it's actually really nice to have stuff like that be visually laid out, right? Okay, so actually, almost running out of time. So let me show you this class I want to show you. So I'll load up my other Storyboards project for my other time. Okay, so skipping ahead a little bit. So I've written this class that you might find sort of useful, and it's a, this is just, I've got all the same stuff in here. By the way, this is not my code here. This is from Apple's example code. I didn't write that. Just letting you know. So anyway, what I did here was I went and I imported this class that I wrote called a segue preparation controller. And if you go to GitHub and look up that name, you're going to find it. Also, I'll post the code here on Twitter or something. So if you go and look that up, you can see this. And what this does, it's just a really simple class that it's kind of nice because it lets you be a little bit more flexible than just having a list of, if statements. And what you do is basically I have a typedef block here, which is a segue preparation block, which takes a segue and a sender. And and if you had something else you needed to send there, you could augment it to do that. But I think that's all you should need. I think that's all you get, so it's all you should need. And then we have two methods, one called set preparation block for segue identifier, right? And then prepare segue sender. And this is, I don't know, I think it's kind of useful, kind of a useful pattern, just because it lets me do things like, it lets me break things up a little bit more way, or if I want to, use that block somewhere else, I want to pass it around in some way. It lets me do things a little bit more interestingly. But here I did it in a pretty boring way, and I'll show you how. Just trying to show you how it works. So I created my, my detail block guy here, which is that when I show my detail view, I would like to set my detail item for that view by grabbing my object and then setting it using this, and then I set that block to be the preparation block for that detail, right? So like maybe if, so if you had some, some other class or something that might use the same block, you could use it for that. Does that make sense? I don't know. You might find that useful. I've been kind of augmenting it to make it do more things so it becomes more useful. That's a little class that I wrote that basically, because I think we're supposed to use blocks for everything now. So let's just do that. And also, that's stupid. So anyway, so when the cell gets tapped or something, this method, this block would get called instead of that other method. So normally what I would do is I would probably not do, if I had like several of these, I'd probably not do them all in one method here. Anyways, does that make sense? Okay. Any questions about anything that we've seen so far? Yes. Mm-hmm. 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 No, I do the same thing for table view cells, actually. So I don't know why I didn't think to do that here also, because that makes a lot of sense. Justin was actually telling me yesterday, you showed me a storyboard for an app he was working on. You're actually not using segues at all, though, right? Yeah, so Justin had it where he just had a big grid of view controllers, and then he gives the identifier name for each one, and then just instantiates it as needed. So it lets him set everything up visually without having to deal with stupid segues, which is kind of cool. I think I might try that in my next app. Okay, so let me go to my last little slide here. Okay, so finishing up. So I should say, use storyboards if you'd like to. If you don't want to, that's cool too. You can, laying out table views is pretty fun. They're aggressively pushed to Xcode 5, and they're, Apple likes them, so maybe you'll like them too. I'm really not selling them hard enough, I'm sorry. No, they're the way of the future. You should be using storyboards. Yeah. Yeah, so that's one of the things that kind of bugs me about storyboards is that there's a lot of views that there's a lot of view controllers that actually, if you were to say lay out all of your app in a storyboard, it doesn't really give you a great way to wow, this thing in this pop-up is actually the exact same view as in the iPhone version, as popover, as in the iPhone version. And that they don't give you any way to do that's kind of annoying. What I've done is where I was saying I use in my settings screen, that's a separate storyboard. So on my iPad version, I load that in a popover or as a modal view, and in and in my other one. So I just deal with that differently by instantiating that in code as I need to. Yeah, I would probably think a lot about how you're going to set up your storyboards if you are going to write a universal app, just because that does become, if you lay out the entire app in one storyboard like that, that's kind of tenable for some apps if you're doing it, just iPhone or just iPad. But when you do both, it becomes kind of a mess. And I hate just repeating things. And it kind of feels like if you do that, you have to repeat something. So that's the best way I found to get around that, and it worked okay. So thank you. So that's me again. If you like me, you can do all the things that involve me. Everybody laughed, and that makes me think that you heard something dirty there that I didn't. I meant subscribe to my RSS feed. It's funny that after somebody laughs at something because they thought it was dirty, saying subscribe to my RSS feed sounds kind of dirty. Anyway, so that's all of the things that I do, and you can follow them or not. And I'm Collin Donnel, and it's been a pleasure. So any other questions at this point? Okay, thank you very much. Have a great day.